Guys, I'm back from Perpetual Watch Lover, and I want to talk to you about three key items that I would suggest to everybody who is getting into collecting vintage watches to always take into account if you're looking into buying a watch. I posted a short about this earlier this week, and there are like three key items that I would always suggest you to look at, and that's the condition, originality, and price. Why these three, you might ask? Well, these three are basically what it boils down to when you want to buy a vintage watch. The condition is number one. This is something that you will have to look into when you want to buy your first watch. Is like, what's the condition you want to buy? Some people only collect almost new old stock watches. Others just want a watch that's like a good wear watch. It's almost the same if like you want to buy like a second-hand car. You ask yourself the same question: do I want one with low mileage? Do I want one that's like used, maybe a little bit cheaper, and it's just a great daily driver? If it was for me personally, I'm somebody who always aims at finding watches that's like an 8 or an 8.5 out of 10. Maybe even up to a 10, a 9 out of 10. But I rarely get a watch that's 10 out of 10. Why, you might ask? Well, I would be afraid to wear it. I would be worried to scratch it up. I personally also don't really have like modern watches. I do have like one recent Datejust that I bought for my newborn son that I'm going to give to him when he's 18. But at the moment, I just wear it occasionally, and I always feel bad when I scratch it up. And let's face it, I'm not the softest on my watches, so I need something that can handle a beating and that will still look fine with a couple of scratches. And what about the originality? Well, this is also something that you have to ask yourself each time you want to buy a watch. For me personally, I prefer an original watch over one with service parts. But that's just because I'm like a collector kind of guy who also happens to sell watches. But if you want a watch that's just going to be like a great watch for everyday wearing, maybe service parts are actually interesting. If you look into Rolex, for example, Rolex would always replace parts, and they are quite famous for it on fora and whatnot, about the fact that they might have ruined certain watches over the past years. Especially if you look into like a Submariner or an Explorer, a 1960s Submariner or Explorer is really, really, really expensive, and they can have like gilt dials, and those watches can fetch up like 20, 30 grand. But if you went into service in the 1980s, for example, with these watches, Rolex would have replaced the dial and hands. Why, you might ask? Well, they want to bring you the watch back from service like it was like a new watch. So they want to give you all the extra things that a new watch has. So they will replace the hands and the dial, so there's no damage on it, but still the lume will also work. Sometimes they even replace cases, this to enhance the waterproofness of the watch. Nowadays, if you go into Rolex, these things are not as bad anymore as they used to be. So this is like something that you have to ask yourself: is this, for me, an issue when I want to buy a watch? Do I want a watch to be totally original and maybe like some of the modern day use? Or do I want a watch that has some service parts, is kinda original because it does fit the watch, but it's not completely the right setting for that watch. Oftentimes, watches with service parts can also be a little bit more affordable. If you think about the gilt dial stuff that I just said, a 1960s Explorer 1 with a gilt dial can maybe be up to 30 grand, but if you get a 1960s one with a service dial, it will be maybe like 10 up to 15 grand. But personally, I would not go for that. And three is like the price points. How much money are you willing to spend on a certain watch? This is something that you have to take into account for anything in life. If you want to buy a new watch, if you want to buy a new car, if you want to buy a new house, it's not always just about the value of the item that you want, but it's also about how much money am I willing to spend. If you look into a Rolex Datejust, for example, I start selling a 1601, for example, at like 3,750 euros. That's the cheapest I kind of go with these. But if you go up in price, you can go up to like 6 grand, 7 grand, 10 grand, even 15 grand for some certain models. But you have to ask yourself the question: at what point is it too much money for me to spend? And why is it this much more expensive? As for example, another one. There are many things to take into account. If you want to buy from a watch dealer like myself or any other watch dealer, we are probably going to be more expensive as somebody you find on Craigslist or secondary markets. But why? We sell watches with warranty, or watches are usually serviced, or at least regulated and checked on originality. We give you paperwork for your insurance. So these things all take into account to the price point. And as with anything in life, as I just said, you need to know how much money am I willing to spend on this little item.